All right, give it a few minutes for some folks to join, and while folks are joining, let me pull up the agenda here and the sorry, I posted in the meeting notes, so feel free to add your attendance.
Hey, Julie, this is Asad. I'm Zakia's husband. She just stepped in. So a couple of things. So today is the doctor will do root canal on tooth number 18, right? 18. Okay. And the excuse me.
Asad, you're not on mute.
It's 636 or something, right? Okay. Is it possible for us to pay it in two, maybe pay
Asad?
half of it today and half next month? Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. You want me to give you my credit card number? Or you already have one?
Have we tried to request to mute?
Yeah. No, I think Brandon has the ability, but he stepped away for a minute. Oh, okay, there we go. Anyway, so yeah, just gonna give it another minute or two for some folks to join, and then we can get to the. I think we have a relatively light agenda again. I know with stuff like I know usually this time of year things are a little quiet after usually post KubeCon until January because of the holidays and everything else. All right, we can probably get started. Remember to put your attendance in the meeting notes. And let me also actually. Just
if you don't mind. Yeah. Also,
why is the
for
quality
her
3.1
next tooth, which is sorry.
Sorry, was that? Hello? Oh, okay, muted. What was that, Justin?
I'm curious, we have the quality or the Q3 2021 goal for the working group at the top of the notes. Does that still there? Deadline is KubeCon 2021.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's all been finished. Yeah, I guess but more probably just it was one of those things where we just never got back to changing it. Just missed it.
Things that sit around for a while become invisible.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, we can. Yeah, I don't think we actually even, because all of the secure software factory reference architecture is done, and all these other things are actually already done. So yes, all of this stuff was accomplished. So let me just delete that for now, and if we have a new goal, we'll add that. Okay, cool. So just as a reminder, I posted in chat the meeting notes. Feel free to add your yourself to the attendance. And one second here. Cool. So as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. It'll be uploaded. Actually, it's being live streamed to YouTube right now, and so it'll be up on YouTube. And your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct. All right, cool. I don't believe we have much of an agenda for this week. I know a lot of folks are still busy with. There was the Cloud Native Security Con RFP, which closed over the weekend. And then there's also the KubeCon EU RFP, which closes tomorrow. So a lot of folks are probably still busy prepping for that sort of stuff. It's the end of one conference, prepping for the next one, that sort of thing. So so yeah, if there's folks who have updates or agenda items, feel free to add them to the meeting, and we can talk about them here.
Hey, Mike, the two documents in the chat, are they exactly the same?
Yeah, they're the same. They're just the same link.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, just some folks had joined later.
Okay.
And in fact, actually, there's some other folks who are joining. So let me post this
And
again.
I do apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't realize my
Yeah, no problem.
and I was carrying out a separate conversation with my dentist. So
no problem. Yeah, no problem. All right, cool. So there's not anything on the agenda for today. I know we're still waiting on additional survey results. I know it's been a bit difficult to get some responses from a lot of the folks. I know we did an analysis last week on some of it, but just wanted to kind of open up the floor to see if folks have new things that they think, because I think it's over the next few weeks as well, we'll probably be talking about anything that folks think we should be focused on for next year, any sort of primary goals for the supply chain group should be focused on for next year. Yeah.
Looks like to me, in my humble opinion, looks like to me there's a lot of confusion about what comprises of supply chain, what are the components, and what does it mean to secure the supply chain at each stage. So if you can get that out of the way, maybe a comprehensive diagram, maybe identifying all the stages. I'm not saying that it's specific vendors, but at least the type of tools and that is used at every stage. I think that would be a huge benefit to a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. So I think there's a couple of things so we do have a white paper that we had released summer of last year. And we also have the CNCF, the reference architecture that we also released summer of this year.
Like mapping existing open source tools to the recommendations in the white paper might be kind of nice. Just to make it easy to not like picking a winner, but listing all of the ones that do different things.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah, basically just like, I think that could be helpful for folks figuring out where to start. Because I think the fact that you want a property is nice, but I think it's also nice to know these are the 3 places you should look if you want this property.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one of the things, just looking at what has worked just to stave off any drama, I don't want to deal with any more drama, is to leave it open to pull request. So if folks want to add a project, they can open up a pull request and put in the reasons why they think it fits in. And as long as it's not very clearly something nefarious or whatever is within the CNCF rules, right? Like I don't know if the idea is like, hey, are people allowed to talk about a paid product or whatever? I don't know. But as long as it follows the rules, I think we should just sort of let whatever in, and then we can just sort of do that. And then maybe even, I don't want to add it to the existing CNCF landscape because that's quite large, but maybe make something like a subset of that CNCF landscape or whatever, some sort of way of highlighting the different highlighting like, hey, here is the diagram of those things, and then here's where the different pieces fit in.
And I think it'd be great if we could have like they were saying, a visual kind of like UI for this. I think that'd be the most useful way to make it accessible.
Cool.
Also what I find the hardest part of this project. But
yeah, and so I think that's a good good point. And so the first step of that, do you think we need to first sort of, I know there's a bunch of different diagrams that sort of outline different views into the problem. Do you think any of those diagrams are suitable as like a, you know, for example, there's like the salsa diagram that shows like source to, you know, package and consumption and the dependencies. Do you think that sort of diagram and filling in sort of where different things fit in? Or do you think that there's more of like an SDLC diagram and saying, hey, here's the different phases of the SDLC and those things? Do you think that there's maybe a different way? Because there's also, for example, one of the folks from Google has an interesting diagram here. I'll share it with the group. There's this diagram, and like this is sort of another view into supply chain security. I'm not gonna, you know, actually, I guess I'll share my screen just real quick. But you know, the idea here is, you know, like Trust Foundation. So this is stuff like Tough and SigStore and Intodo, or you know, well, sorry, not Intodo. So software attestations where you have stuff like Intodo, Salsa, etc. And then you have the aggregation and synthesis, which is stuff like, at least right now, there's not a lot, but there's stuff like Guac and some of the other tools that are starting to try and like aggregate it. And then you have the policy tools like, you know, Kyverno and OPA, and even some of the paid ones that are kind of coming out there, like, you know, Enforce and Gatekeeper or sorry, Styra, DAS, and whatever there is. So there's lots of different ways to, I think, view the problem. And so I guess I would be interested to know if
yeah, I wonder if we had anything in the white paper, because I think that something that's broad enough without being too complicated looking would be nice, just to make sure we cover all the different categories, all the way from like, you know, from build to sorry, from source to build to distribution, but also all the different actors involved. Yeah, I think this is in some ways the hard part, is figuring out a good way to make, because I think there's a lot of tools in each subcategory, and it'd be nice to separate out those subcategories. So you can say like, these are the tools that address this. And some tools address like, you know, multiple subcategories, and we can make that clear how that works out.
One of the other concerns, I think, is that people will want to grouse and have their tool try to be listed everywhere in some cases, because it does, you know, while it's a tool that does 99% X, there's like 0.1% Y in there. And so, you know, or we're going to add point Y in the next release, so it should really be there. So I think that the diagram that actually shows, like the one you just showed, the concern I have is that everybody will want their thing everywhere because it's nebulous enough. If you have it more where you have an actual diagram of a, you know, of a sample software supply chain that contains all the sorts of components people would have, then your code being on this box or not being on this box is a much more binary decidable thing rather than, you know, do you do policy?
yeah, I think that's another good point. I do wonder if like how the CNCF currently handles it with some of their landscape stuff. You know, like how do they make sure that like, you know, none of the projects try and say like, oh, we technically do it all, you know, or whatever. I think that that's interesting. And then I think also one of the things that you had brought up, Marina, and just kind of maybe think of some of this is, I think one of the first things we should sort of think through is supply chain security. Generally, at least the growing consensus around it, right, is it starts at any sort of ingestion of third-party code or third-party dependencies or whatever, as well as any sort of code that is written by a person. Anything that starts there is where the sort of supply chain security picture kind of begins, I guess. When you think about it from the pure perspective of like, hey, I'm about to build some software or I'm about to consume some software. And then it ends with, you know, the actual safe production or consumption of that software down the line. And I guess the idea here, though, is from the CNCF perspective, where does the CNCF sort of draw the line on what its scope is, right? Because I know largely we sometimes dip our toes beyond just purely cloud native into just sort of cutting edge tech kind of focus. But I'd be curious to get folks' thoughts on how they think we should scope the landscape so that it also makes sure that like we don't just include, I don't know, like something that doesn't really meet the cloud native definition.
It's a good question. I think maybe scoping this to properties that tools actually provide could be useful, because and would say like we do build security, but do you actually provide like, you know, separation or something like that within the context of build? Is maybe easier to define for any particular tool. I don't know about the cloud native question though. That's a harder one, I think, in some ways, because I think a lot of tools work both in and outside of cloud native. Yeah.
I think for that, if I think the view of cloud native is increasingly trying to be broad. I don't think people are trying to say like, let's put it in a really tight box. Like if you don't use Docker, you're not cloud native. If you don't, you know, use Kubernetes, you're not cloud native. I think there's been a willingness in the space to try to expand the scope as much as possible. So I think we could perhaps do that to a point where it starts to get a little absurd and then back off, would be my feeling. Because people use cloud native and all sorts of things, and yeah, who are we to, you know, to say this? We can also ask Chris, Anacek, or others what they think, but I would be surprised if they want us to scope it super tightly.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. But it was also something that we kind of, I guess one of the things that we had run into in the past with, for example, the best practices guide and the reference architecture, was we had some folks asking if, like, to be blunt, I guess a little bit, is like, hey, how does this handle like, how does this handle the like COBOL use case? And we're like, well, it's cloud native, so we're really focused on some of these other things. And like, to be clear, that doesn't mean you can't run COBOL cloud native, but if you were to do it, we are more focused on things like Kubernetes, containers, cloud focus, like infrastructure as code and yada yada, and not as focused on, some of the other things like, traditional firewall rules. Like we're focused on stuff like zero trust and some of those other concepts. So I think like we just need to be, maybe we don't really define a core scope outside of just saying, yeah, that probably doesn't fit cloud native, and just kind of call it that way.
Yeah, we could even refer to those things and just say you kind of have to do your own assessment of them because it's so varied. But here's how that assessment would plug in. That might be more useful than trying to just toss them to the wolves if they wander outside of the fenced-in area.
I mean, we may not consider it very significant, but as far as the enterprise is concerned, they're struggling with basic things like, for instance, what is the right process when they can actually take this, just the very start, right? They can take their source and they can get third-party containers images, and then how are they going to secure their base images? How are they going to, a process, not just and how we're going to do that, and how we're going to apply the upgrades regularly. At what stage are they going to be doing the scanning, and what happens? So, maybe there is one repository where they are collecting these and then applying, the image scanning or detection and correction, and then maybe there is another repository where things are deposited after that. So, but then there is a process, right, in place, right? Things get patched up, right? So they want to be able to, they have a CI/CD pipeline, but let's say every once a month, they want to redeploy things just to make sure that all the latest patches are up there. So what would be the process of that? So there are some very practical things that we can really help the enterprise on.
Yeah. So I agree with that. I do wonder on that front if some of that is answered by like the previous work that we've done in the group, and just we need to better market it. Because I do. Just to be clear, like a lot of folks are asking these same questions, so it's not just you. And so I'm curious, like a lot of the folks on this call have contributed to some of these documents. And I think what we'd love to see is how can we get that maybe out there a bit more, so that we can say, hey, some of the questions about how you should be running your CI pipeline are answered by the Secure Software Factory reference architecture.
Yeah.
As well as one of the implementations of it, as Fresca, which is an OpenSSF project, but there's a lot of other tools that are doing this sort of stuff. Like there's some implementations that focus on GitHub and some of that stuff. So I do wonder like how we can kind of push that a little bit harder, because to be clear, you're not the only person sort of asking that like question, saying, hey, where's this thing? And it's like, actually, we've written up something on that. I think it's just maybe something like that landscape, and kind of really pushing that to the front of folks' minds, so that folks can see like this landscape is based on the best practices guide, saying, hey, if you think your tool meets these practices, cool, add it to the landscape. If you think your tool is an implementation of the reference architecture or whatever, add that to there.
So one thing we should also keep in mind, that enterprise is not going to just implement the entire software supply chain, secure supply chain in one go. They're going to do it in phases, right? For example, what is the first thing they're going to do? They're going to take this, the very first, either front end of it, maybe container vulnerability scanning, making it part of the process and all that. And then later on, maybe in the second phase, maybe creating SBOMs and signing them, and maybe later on attaching attestations and provenance. And so I think that's all going to happen in phases. I don't think enterprise is ready to take the entire end-to-end software supply chain and say, okay, we're gonna put all our resources and effort, and then we're gonna implement that. I think that's why if we could break it down into these phases, that would be great, actually. This one.
Yes. So yeah, we do that a lot in the best practices guide, where we kind of say like what the priority of these things are, and some of that. The Secure Software Factory is a little bit more like, hey, assuming you're doing all the right things, this is what it would look like. I think also maybe that's also something we should partner with the Cartographos group a little bit more on. So the Cartographos group is focused on sort of maturity in the cloud native journey and the cloud native spaces. So one of the things that they have is kind of this like step-by-step, like, okay, this is your first foray into sort of cloud native and you're a large enterprise. This is most likely what your journey will look like. You're not going to adopt everything right out of the gate, and so on. But I think we need to just make sure that, yeah, I agree with you that like, hey, a lot of folks are coming up with their, it's not an all or nothing proposition. And we hope the documents largely aren't an all or nothing proposition, where that like folks feel like, hey, if I'm not, using in toto layouts and using workload identities and using tough for everything, then like, if I'm not using any of that, then it's not even worth doing. Like, no. There's phases to kind of ramp up.
Yep.
And we do think that that's kind of worthwhile. And with that said, I think that there's a couple of things there. One is, some of that's going to involve some of the other groups, like the Cartographos group, to kind of help out with exploring what that journey looks like. And also, in addition to that, I think we'd love to maybe even get some feedback on the existing docs to say, hey, these things are really, really hard for folks. And so, can we break this down in a V2 of the doc or in a supplementary material? I think that might be useful.
Okay.
I have a question about the definition of cloud native. For most subjects in the computer science, there's always like a group of either university professor or research group that's kind of defining the concept. So for cloud native, I know Google has been a driver behind most of it. But at this point, is there a known group of names of university that's behind, like, defining what is the scope of cloud native?
No. I am not aware of it, and I probably would know, but I don't think so.
Yeah, the reason I did talk to Brandon about what can I contribute. So as I've been a long-time database guy, so 20 plus years. So when it comes to security database, there's quite a few very detailed guidelines for how to make database secure. So same thing for storage. There's a kind of storage industry group that have very big document of security guidelines. But when it comes to cloud native, so what applies to cloud native is the question, because if we don't know the scope of what is cloud native, there's no way to see, what is actually applies to this world.
Yeah, so I think to chime in on that. So I believe the TOC repository has a definition of cloud native, although that's still pretty broad and generic. We've had a little bit of a conversation as much as we are talking about like what the work that the tag does. And I think we came to the conclusion that that's some of the work that Raga did with kind of like the glossary of what's like cloud native and stuff like that. I think like we kind of did the exercise and scoped down like, okay, here are things that are cloud native, and anything that may not be cloud native, but cloud native uses it in a different way, or cloud native creates different implications for it, is in scope of what we're doing. We also have, I think, a couple documents that we worked on with like personas and things like that. I'll try and find it and put it in the chat or in the Slack channel.
Okay. Yeah, that would be very helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I think a couple of us have a conflict with another CNCF meeting. So we have to cut this meeting short, unfortunately. Unless Justin or Pav, you wanna continue on the meeting.
I just wanted to give a really quick shout out to, we're going to be starting a verifiable SBOMs discussion. And if you want more information about that, this is not officially a CNCF project, but is probably of interest to people in this group and other groups. You can join the verifiable SBOMs channel on the CNCF Slack and get more information about meetings and documents and other things like that.
I'm definitely very interested in that. So should I look for on Slack channel?
Yes, verifiable SBOMs on Slack, on the CNCF Slack.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you, everybody.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
Next week is Thanksgiving, so I don't think we're having a meeting. FYI. Cool.